Caffeine Blues by Stephen Cherniske. Wake Up to the Hidden Dangers of America's #1 Drug. This is an incredible book that I highly recommend. If you drink caffeine at all, whether it's coffee, tea, soft drinks, or any other form, this is a very important book and one that I wish I would have read a long time ago. Caffeine is a drug which a lot of people assume gives them energy. I always assumed that myself. But really the chemical way that this interacts with our body is that it causes parts of our body, such as the adrenal glands, to release stress hormones. And it's the heightened levels of stress hormones and adrenaline and so forth that cause us to feel more alert. But really, caffeine and the drinks don't add any energy in and of themselves, except for maybe soft drinks if you consider the sugar adding energy. So caffeine as a drug, the author compares at times to amphetamine, which is not providing any energy, but it stimulates the central nervous system such that the person feels at a higher level of happiness, of satisfaction, alertness, whatever it may be. And so for me, I wish I would have read this book a long time ago to avoid some of the common issues of caffeine abuse with which this author talks about. To go into one of the best analogies in his books, he says, "What I teach my students is that this behavior is abnormal. If smoke started pouring into a classroom, I ask, would you be concerned? The next question, what would you think if someone appeared in a smoke-filled door saying, 'Don't worry, folks, I've turned off the fire alarm'?" Now my students all laugh because the scenario is absurd. We know that smoke is a worrisome sign and disconnecting the alarm is not the same as putting out the fire. Yet Americans spend over $200 billion on prescription and over-the-counter drugs every year. And this book was written at least a decade or so ago, so that number is surely higher. The vast majority of which do nothing to cure the underlying cause of pain and illness. And look at the top sellers. Ulcer medications are #1, followed by antidepressants and tranquilizers. Clearly the stress caffeine factor is a major part of most people's illness and pain. And what the author is getting at by talking about these drugs that target ulcers, antidepressants, and tranquilizers is that these are all conditions as a response to stress, especially prolonged stress in the case of depression, which I've suffered from in the past. Part of the reason that I really enjoyed reading this book was taking a look at how specifically the drug interacts with people with depression and also further contributes and worsens that depression. And my decision was to essentially go cold turkey on caffeine. And I'm about 4 days into it, although yesterday my new landlord gave me chocolate-covered coffee beans. So there's caffeine in the chocolate and the coffee beans, obviously. So I'm not going entirely cold turkey, but I've stopped buying coffee and I've stopped purchasing anything that would contain caffeine, such as a Diet Coke. And the author says that this could take up to 30 to 60 days for the body to fully detoxify and essentially normalize to how the blood pressure and how the stress hormones and so forth should be in the absence of the drug called caffeine. Now, the author doesn't recommend going cold turkey. The author thinks that's a pretty good way to set oneself up for failure. I disagree because for me, I see how incredibly important this is on many levels. Having a history of depression and also enjoying alcoholic beverages, I see my caffeine use as being very closely related to my alcohol use, because caffeine essentially is a stimulant along the lines of amphetamines. It increases the stress hormones, which gives a perceived alertness and a perceived higher sense of energy. And alcohol is, of course, a depressant. So what I've found myself doing in the past is that in the morning I'll drink lots of coffee to get through the day, and in the evening I'm wired still, and then I need something like a nightcap or even significantly more alcohol in order to depress the same central nervous system that I had previously excited earlier in the morning. So for me, I thought that the best way for me to proceed is to go cold turkey. And if someone gives me chocolate-covered coffee beans, of course I'm going to eat them. I think it's one of the 7 deadly sins to refuse chocolate. And so aside from that, I've gone cold turkey, and I've been surprised at how I've not perceived any difference in alertness or cognition, except that I do see myself being more irritable, more short-fused. Those are 2 of the key withdrawal symptoms that I've seen. And another withdrawal symptom, which probably will surprise you, is that I've had insomnia ever since, well, in the past 4 nights, since cutting out caffeine. Insomnia, paradoxically, is one of the potential withdrawal symptoms of getting rid of caffeine. And there's a whole variety of withdrawal symptoms, and the book has a guide for those who want to gradually reduce it without having to experience any of those withdrawal symptoms. He has guides for, of course, how to measure caffeine intake and how to gradually reduce it over a 60-day period. I highly recommend this book. It's an incredibly important book, and I want to close this review of the book with how the author closed his book. The author is talking about how caffeine, as it is a drug, like any other drug, can potentially change the personality and the way that a person is. The author says, get off the caffeine drug and find out who you really are. And I do believe that as I go through this process of getting rid of caffeine, Lord willing, if I can stay strong with that I'll be able to think more clearly and see more clearly about what's important to me, as well as being more moderate about how I'm living and exercising and drinking and so forth. I highly recommend this book by Stephen Cherniske. This is Caffeine